The storm rolled in fast over the Pacific, faster than anyone along the Oregon coast expected. It was October of 1984, and the wind that night screamed through the trees like it had a purpose. Waves slammed against the harbor walls. Rain pounded rooftops, and entire towns along the southern shoreline lost power as thunder rattled windows into the early morning hours. But Ben Fowler didn't hesitate. He was a carpenter, not a sailor, though he'd spent the last 5 years building something most men only dreamed of, a 32-foot wooden cutter-style sailboat, crafted by hand from the ribs of Douglas firs and red cedar planks he'd milled himself. He named her the Wren, after the bird that used a nest on the porch of his workshop each spring. The boat was his life's work, not for sale, not for show, built with care, sweat, and solitude. So when the storm warnings hit the radio late that afternoon, Ben didn't wait. He told his wife, Dorothy, that he needed to check the lines of the marina just south of Coos Bay, where the Wren was anchored. He left on foot, raincoat slung over one shoulder, flashlight in hand. She watched him walk down the muddy path from their hillside home, the wind already lifting his collar, the trees bending low in the distance. She never saw him again. By sunrise, the storm had passed, leaving a trail of debris along the coastline. Small boats were tossed onto rocks. Floating docks snapped like toothpicks. But when authorities checked the marina, the Wren was gone, along with Ben. No wreckage. No flares, no sign of a struggle or an accident, just an empty berth and frayed mooring ropes. The Coast Guard launched a 3-day search along the coastline and deeper into the ocean. Helicopters scanned the waves. Boats trawled the surf. But nothing turned up. Not a plank, not a life jacket, not a trace. The assumption, made quietly and without ceremony, was that the boat had capsized and gone under. Maybe Ben was thrown overboard. Maybe he went down with her. Dorothy refused to believe it. She kept his workshop exactly the way he left it. Tools on the wall. Blueprints rolled up in the corner. A half-carved tiller sitting on the bench, still dusted with sawdust. She never remarried, never moved, never accepted condolences. The locals called it devotion. Others whispered about denial. But Dorothy didn't care what they thought. Something had happened that night, yes, but it wasn't the ending they thought it was. She waited. Years passed. The marina was rebuilt, then sold to private investors. The Wren became something of a local legend, a ghost ship, a mystery that faded into folklore. Children told stories about it. Teenagers dared each other to dive where it once floated, but no one expected it to ever turn up again. Then, in the summer of 2011, a Coast Guard dive team was conducting a routine training operation in a narrow inlet 20 miles south of where the Wren had last been seen. The area, known locally as Breaker's Hollow, was shallow near the edges but dropped off steeply near the center. The team had been mapping underwater topography when one diver noticed something beneath the sand, angled wood and metal shapes. Faint but distinct. They cleared away the silt with gloved hands. And there it was, the hull of a wooden vessel, largely intact, resting silently on the ocean floor at a depth of over 100 feet. The divers resurfaced, marked the location, and returned the next day with full recovery equipment. What they found stunned everyone. The vessel was the Wren, preserved, untouched, still fully sealed, with no signs of collision, burning, or breakage. The hull had no gaping holes, no structural failure. The rudder was in place. The mast had broken at the midpoint, but that was expected given the depth and pressure. The name on the stern was still visible beneath a film of algae. Even stranger, the boat's interior had remained sealed and dry. When they opened the main hatch, they found tools in drawers, a lantern hanging from the ceiling, and a logbook resting on the navigation table. Its pages only slightly curled with moisture. The last entry, in Ben's familiar handwriting, was dated the same night he disappeared. But that wasn't the part that kept the divers talking. It was what they found on the deck. Tied down with thick marine rope, lashed at 4 corners to the cleats, was a large object wrapped in oilcloth and canvas. At first, it was assumed to be a bundle of emergency supplies, maybe an extra sail or flotation gear. But when they began to cut the ropes and peel back the layers, they realized this wasn't equipment. It was something else. Something deliberately secured. The divers radioed for further instruction, and within hours, the site was closed to the public. The object was brought to the surface and sealed in a containment bin. Photos were taken, measurements recorded. Dorothy was notified the following day. When she arrived at the recovery site, she didn't ask questions. She only said one thing as she looked at the boat, now hoisted above water for the first time in 27 years. I knew he wouldn't let her sink. And yet, what Ben had tied to the deck wasn't part of the Wren. It didn't belong to any ship. And according to every sailor and official on site, it didn't belong in the ocean at all. The object retrieved from the deck of the Wren was unlike anything the recovery team had expected to find. It measured roughly 5 feet long and 2 feet wide, wrapped in tightly sealed canvas and layers of oilcloth that had grown brittle with age, but still protected whatever was inside. The ropes securing it had been tied in precise sailor's knots, weathered but intact, their placement too deliberate to be haphazard. This wasn't storm debris Ben had salvaged. It had been placed there before the boat disappeared. When the Coast Guard opened it under controlled conditions at a facility in Newport, what they found inside raised more questions than answers. Beneath the final canvas layer was a wooden crate, homemade, like the boat itself, bolted shut and reinforced with iron brackets. Etched into the top of the crate, carved by hand, were the initials BF and a symbol no one could identify, a crescent shape above a horizontal line, with 3 vertical slashes beneath it. The crate was opened with care. Inside was a strange assortment of items, arranged meticulously and held in place with old leather straps, a long metal cylinder, sealed at both ends with wax, a collection of small glass vials, empty but labeled with coded inscriptions, a leather-bound ledger filled with sketches and symbols, and finally, at the very bottom, a small wooden box containing what looked like shards of black stone, glossy, angular, and unnaturally smooth. The objects were transferred to a private lab for examination, but nothing definitive was ever publicly released. Unofficially, one technician described the stones as non-native, not geologically consistent with local formations, possibly not even from the Pacific region at all. Another, more cryptically, said they were reactive to pressure and heat, but not in any way we understand. Word spread quickly through the coastal community. Reporters camped outside the facility. Amateur historians dug through newspaper archives. Conspiracy forums lit up overnight. But Dorothy Fowler remained silent. She didn't grant interviews. She didn't speculate. When asked about the crate, she simply said, Ben was building more than a boat. He just didn't tell anyone. The press latched onto that phrase, building more than a boat. Suddenly, Ben Fowler wasn't just a missing carpenter. He was something else entirely. A man with secrets. A craftsman who vanished in a storm and returned, decades later, wrapped in mystery. Douglas Vey, a retired Coast Guard officer who had searched for Ben back in 1984, came out of retirement just to see the Wren in person. He had a vivid memory of that storm. He'd been in one of the helicopters during the search, flying low along the waves. "We didn't miss it," he told a reporter. "That boat wasn't there. We covered every mile of that shoreline. Either she went down and came up later, or she wasn't in the water at all." When asked what he meant, Vey only shook his head. Boats don't disappear and resurface like that, not without help. Meanwhile, the Wren was placed in dry dock for restoration. Despite her long rest beneath the sea, her frame had held firm. The builders marveled at the craftsmanship. Everything was overbuilt. The joints had been reinforced with techniques typically used in storm survival vessels. The hull was coated with a type of marine sealant not commonly available in the 1980s. But the biggest surprise came from beneath the floorboards of the cabin. As the restoration team removed warped planks, they found a concealed compartment, airtight and padded on the inside. Inside it were several pages, laminated with wax, folded and sealed in a linen pouch. They were journal entries, handwritten by Ben Fowler. The entries weren't dated in the traditional sense. Instead, they used references to the lunar cycle. 3 days after the waning half, one read, "Before the second tide." They described navigation points that didn't appear on any maritime charts. Vague coordinates, descriptions of fog walls, silent coves, and the black current that pulled against the known tides. But what truly rattled the archivist was the content of the final entry. The sky folded in on itself tonight. Everything went quiet, like the sea forgot how to move. I waited on deck with the crate lashed tight, lights beneath the surface, not reflections, shapes. I was seen, and still I went forward. There was no explanation, no signature, no direct reference to where he'd gone, only that last line. And still I went forward. Theories multiplied. Some claimed Ben had stumbled upon a military experiment and vanished under government watch. Others said he had found a natural anomaly, an underwater cave system or electromagnetic zone that disrupted perception and time. But none of those theories explained why the Wren had returned fully intact, or why it bore no signs of having spent 27 years at sea. Divers who'd examined the hull said there was almost no marine growth, no barnacles, no algae bloom typical of a long-submerged vessel. It was as if the boat had only recently entered the water. Days ago, weeks at most, Dorothy spent time alone aboard the boat during its restoration. She sat in the small cabin, ran her fingers across the wood he'd shaped with his own hands. She never cried in public, never offered statements. But one day, a young member of the restoration crew found her standing at the bow, eyes closed, whispering softly to the wind. "He finished it," she said. "He finished the whole journey." No one knows exactly what she meant, but in the months that followed, Dorothy began packing up Ben's workshop. The tools were wrapped, the sawdust swept away. The half-carved tiller was mounted on the wall above the fireplace, and the Wren, once a monument to a man's disappearance, became a vessel of return. Only one mystery remained. The strange symbol carved into the crate, the crescent above the line, with 3 vertical slashes, was found again, etched into the underside of the tiller in the workshop, meaning Ben had placed it there himself, long before he ever sailed into storm. The symbol, 3 slashes beneath a crescent and a line, began appearing in places no one had thought to look before. It wasn't just on the crate or under the tiller. It was carved into the back of a drawer in Ben's workshop, etched faintly on the inside of a cupboard door, even scratched into the underside of a plank stored beneath his workbench, always in the same shape, always in places hidden from casual view. To Dorothy, this wasn't random. She believed Ben had left a trail. She reached out to an old friend of his, a man named Caleb Mercer, a retired Marine surveyor who had once helped Ben test a Wren during its early stages. Caleb was a quiet man, rarely spoke in public, but when Dorothy showed him one of the symbols, his face changed. He didn't act surprised. He acted like he recognized it. "This again," he muttered under his breath. When pressed, Caleb admitted that he'd seen the symbol once before. In the late 1960s, while working on a salvage operation near the Columbia River mouth, he and his crew had come across a partially buried wreck, an older fishing vessel, broken in half, long since rotted. Inside the cabin, carved into a bulkhead, was the exact same symbol. He didn't think much of it at the time, just assumed it was something the previous owner had marked for luck. Now, looking at it again on Ben's crate, he wasn't so sure. He also shared something else. Back in the 70s, Ben had once asked him a strange question. "Do you believe a place can exist only when you're looking for it?" Caleb had laughed then, thinking it was one of Ben's many philosophical tangents. But now, with the resurfacing of the Wren, he wasn't so quick to dismiss it. Dorothy began sorting through Ben's notebooks, which had remained untouched in his workshop since the night he vanished. Most contained both schematics, material lists, sketches of joints and hull curves. But one, smaller and leather-bound, stood out. Tucked between pages of measurements was a map, hand-drawn, like everything else Ben made. It was the Oregon coastline, but altered. Familiar capes and inlets were there, but so were unfamiliar markings, loops, shaded zones, and compass bearings that didn't follow traditional navigation logic. At the center of the map, drawn in heavy ink, was a circle labeled drift window. There was no explanation for the term, but beneath it, in block letters, Ben had written, 3 days before new moon, low tide, constant bearing holds. Dorothy took the map to Caleb, who studied it for nearly an hour before saying anything. "If this is what I think it is," he said slowly, "it's not a route. It's a timing." They decided to test it. On a cold November morning, Caleb and a small crew took a charter boat to the point marked on Ben's map, about 12 miles offshore, near a stretch of water known for unpredictable currents. They arrived at the precise time indicated in the notebook, 3 days before the new moon, just after the second low tide. The ocean was calm, the sky overcast. Then, without warning, the GPS system on board began to flicker. The compass needle spun, corrected itself, then spun again. The depth gauge fluctuated between readings, jumping from 20 to 80 feet, then back to 30. The radio, tuned to the Coast Guard channel, filled with static, then went completely silent. And then, for exactly 4 minutes, nothing moved. No wind, no waves. The ocean flattened like glass. It wasn't natural. Caleb had spent 40 years on the sea and had never seen anything like it. Then the wind returned. The radio popped back to life. The compass steadied. The sea returned to normal. They returned to shore without incident. But something had happened. Something real. And Ben Fowler, it seemed, had known about it nearly 3 decades earlier. News of the experiment didn't spread far. Dorothy didn't want it to. But one of the younger crew members posted a blurry cell phone video of the ocean going still. It went viral within days. The post was filled with tags like portal, ocean anomaly, and ghost zone. Most viewers dismissed it as a trick of light or edited footage. But not everyone. A week later, Dorothy received a package in the mail. There was no return address. Inside was a single photograph, black and white, old. It showed a man standing on the deck of a wooden boat, wearing a raincoat, holding what appeared to be a large coil of rope. The vessel wasn't a Wren, but its hull shape was similar, possibly another of Ben's earlier designs. Behind the man, just barely visible, was a fog bank unlike any Dorothy had ever seen. But what stopped her breath was the man's face. It was Ben, not 45-year-old Ben from 1984. Older, maybe in his 60s. Bearded, thinner, but unmistakably him. Written on the back of the photograph, in fading pencil, were just 2 words. Still building. Dorothy didn't show the photo to reporters. She didn't post it online. Instead, she took it back to the workshop and placed it on the wall above his desk. That evening, she sat in the unfinished hull of a skiff Ben had been restoring before his disappearance. She ran her hand along the inside rail, and for the first time in 27 years, she spoke aloud in the quiet of the space he'd built. "Wherever you are, I hope the tides are steady." The next morning, the local harbor master called her. A sealed message had been found inside a glass bottle, retrieved by a crabber west of Coos Bay. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, laminated in wax. No signature, no date, but on the paper was a sketch of the Wren, and below it, a single line written in Ben's hand. She was never meant to stay in one world. The sketch found in the bottle, the Wren, rendered in Ben Fowler's unmistakable hand, was studied by experts at the Regional Maritime Museum in Newport. The drawing was precise, showing the vessel from an angle not publicly available at the time. The curator confirmed it included details added during the Wren's restoration, meaning the artist had seen her in her current state. But how could Ben have drawn a restored version of a boat last seen in 1984? The ink was real, the wax seal authentic. The bottle itself? Vintage, pre-1990s. But the drawing told a different story. And the message beneath it: she was never meant to stay in one world, left even the skeptics uncomfortable. Dorothy stayed silent. She no longer needed the validation of experts or media. Her husband was reaching out, just not in the way anyone expected. 2 weeks later, Dorothy returned to the dock where the Wren was moored for continued preservation. She walked slowly along the floating planks, now weathered and groaning in the tide. When she stepped aboard, the wind shifted. A quiet gust moved through the rigging, and the ropes tapped gently against the mast like knuckles on wood. She stepped into the cabin and noticed something new. A single page had been slipped between the slats of the navigation table, clean, dry, and resting flat as though it had always been there. It was another page from Ben's journals. The handwriting was slightly shakier, but still his. They say the sea forgets. But not this one. The sea remembers. It opens when it chooses. And when it closes, it doesn't trap, it protects. I thought I was building a boat, but I wasn't. I was building a threshold. The note wasn't signed. No explanation. No dates. Just that quiet declaration. Dorothy folded the paper and held it close to her chest. That same week, another discovery came from an unexpected place. A local high school science club, participating in a shoreline cleanup project north of Bandon, recovered a torn piece of sailcloth tangled in driftwood. It bore part a serial number linked to materials Ben had ordered in 1983. Fused into the corner was a patch stitched by hand, using a looping knot pattern unique to Ben's own designs, something he had invented and taught to no one. Tucked inside the fabric was a waterproof pouch. Inside, a cassette tape. The audio was garbled in parts, washed by time and exposure. But as the hiss cleared, a voice came through. Quiet, measured, careful. It was Ben. October 1984. The pressure dropped so fast, the clouds folded into water. There was no horizon, only silver, and then black. I saw the markers, just like the chart said. The stars blinked out, one by one. I knew it was opening, and I wasn't afraid. There was a long pause, broken only by the gentle sound of water lapping against hull. Then, softer. If I don't come back, it's not because I'm lost. It's because I found something that doesn't fit inside time the way we do. Another pause. Tell Dorothy I finished it. And I saw it. And it's real. That was all. The tape was archived and copied. Experts attempted to enhance the audio. The original was returned to Dorothy, who kept it in a small cedar box beside her bed. The story of the Wren spread again. But it had changed. No longer just a local mystery. It captured global curiosity. Writers called it the threshold vessel. Theories ranged from time anomalies to geophysical wormholes. The military denied any involvement. No release a formal statement. No known atmospheric or oceanic phenomenon matches the reported conditions. Still, no one could explain how the boat had remained preserved, or why its reappearance aligned exactly with the lunar window marked in Ben's notes. But someone else was watching. In January 2012, Dorothy received a letter in the mail, typed and signed, postmarked from a rural route in Washington state. It read, "There are others who have built what Ben built. Few finish, few return, but some do." He wasn't alone in that sea. There was no contact information, no follow-up, just one line at the bottom. Look beneath the ballast. 3 nails counterclockwise. Dorothy returned to the preservation site the next morning. With permission, she carefully removed the floor panels in the Wren's hold and examined the area beneath the main ballast. There, exactly as the letter said, were 3 nails set in a perfect counterclockwise arc, each slightly raised, unlike any of the others. When she pried them loose, a small compartment opened. Inside, wrapped in wax paper and cloth, was a final journal. Not one from before Ben vanished, but one he had apparently written after. The pages were dated by lunar cycle again, but included references to events that occurred after 1984, storms in 1991, the eclipse of 1999, Even mention of the Wren's retrieval from the sea in 2011. It was impossible, unless Ben had somehow been watching. The journal was full of sketches, entries, and diagrams, fragments of something larger. But near the end, one page stood out. A single line, written in large, confident script. The Wren was only ever meant to go one way. Below it, a drawing, a simple compass rose. But the north point had been scratched out, and the remaining directions? Not N, S, E, or W. Just 4 words. Above, below, within, beyond. Dorothy Fowler sat in her kitchen with Ben's final journal open before her, the page lit by the soft amber glow of a hanging lamp. Outside, the sea groaned softly in the distance, calm now, indifferent. But in her chest, a different tide stirred. The words, above, below, within, beyond, felt less like directions and more like an invitation, or a threshold, as Ben had called it. Something he hadn't merely passed through, but something he had learned to navigate, a place he hadn't stumbled into but had built a way to reach. For decades, Dorothy had waited for closure. Now, she understood, Ben had never vanished. He had crossed into a space outside explanation, a space that answered to tides far older than time. And somehow, impossibly, he had found ways to reach back across. The next morning, she returned to the Wren one final time. The restoration crew had finished their work. The hull gleamed with new sealant. The lines had been checked, the interior restored to match Ben's original design. She walked barefoot across the deck, felt the familiar rhythm of the wood beneath her, and ran her hand along the tiller, the one he had carved, marked with a strange crescent and 3 lines. She stepped into the cabin and placed the final journal in the drawer below the chart table. She locked it, and she didn't take the key. That same week, Dorothy made arrangements. She donated Ben's tools to the local school. His workshop, which had sat untouched for 27 years, was offered to a young carpenter looking to start over. She gave away nothing that held his writing. Those she packed gently and placed in the cedar chest beside her bed. But she kept one thing close at all times: the photograph of Ben on the unknown boat, older, surrounded by mist. On the back, she'd written a new note: "You kept building. So will I." Months passed. Interest in the Wren remained high, but the public attention faded. The world turned, distracted by the next strange thing, the next unsolved mystery. Yet among certain circles, naval archivists, fringe geographers, independent researchers, the case became a quiet obsession. People began mapping locations where similar symbols had been found: cave systems in Patagonia, rock formations off the coast of Iceland, etchings in Arctic driftwood. Always the same, a crescent over a line, 3 slashes beneath. In time, one researcher, a Norwegian linguist named Soren Halvik, released a paper arguing that the symbol wasn't decorative or arbitrary. It was a stylized form of a phrase from an extinct Arctic dialect. Roughly translated, it meant path holds only for the willing. He cited Ben's journals, his timing charts, his meticulous records of tides and moon cycles. Halvik's conclusion was careful, academic, and ultimately inconclusive. But one phrase lingered. Fowler may not have vanished. He may have aligned. Back in Oregon, Dorothy aged quietly, never publicly speaking again about her husband or the boat. But in 2017, she passed along a sealed envelope to the Maritime Museum in Newport with instructions to open it only in the event the Wren was ever found missing again. 5 years later, it was on the morning of August 12th, 2022, the harbor master arrived for a routine inspection. The Wren, secured tightly the night before, was gone. No broken ropes, no signs of towing, just a vacant slip. Divers scoured the nearby coast, thinking perhaps she had slipped and drifted. But the sea was calm that night, and the logs confirmed there was no wind. The museum opened the envelope. Inside was a simple note: if the moon was right, she would try again. Let her go. It was signed, DF. There was also a small folded map, similar to the one Ben had left behind, with new notations. A line from the Oregon coast, another circle in the sea, and below it, one sentence written in a flowing hand. When the world forgets what straight lines look like, that's where we'll meet. As of today, the Wren has not been seen again. No debris, no signal. Only the records remain, Ben's journals, the recovered tape, the crate's contents, the impossible compass rose with its strange cardinal points. Above, below, within, beyond. Some say the Wren sails still, slipping through fold of fog no map can hold. Others say she was never a boat at all, but a doorway, patiently waiting for a man who knew how to build not just across the ocean, but through it. And if you find yourself on a quiet stretch of Oregon shore, when the air stills and the tide drops fast, look to the horizon. You might see her, a silhouette against silver sky, cutting through water too calm for wind. And if you do, don't call her lost. Call her on her way.